The intersection of evolutionary psychology and human transformation presents one of the most fascinating landscapes in modern behavioral science. Through decades of research into mate selection, consumer behavior, and the fundamental drives that shape human decision-making, we begin to understand not merely what people do, but why they are compelled to do it. This understanding becomes the foundation for a more profound truth, that the individual who conquers their own weaknesses transcends the power others might hold over them. Geoffrey Miller's extensive research into human sexuality, mate choice, and evolutionary psychology has illuminated patterns in human behavior that many find uncomfortable to acknowledge. His work, spanning from studies of sexual selection to analyses of consumer behavior, reveals the unconscious mechanisms that drive much of human decision-making. While his most publicized research involved a small study of exotic dancers rather than a large-scale analysis of sex workers, the principles underlying his broader body of work offer profound insights into human nature and the possibility of transcending our biological programming. The human mind operates on multiple levels simultaneously. At the deepest level lie the ancient evolutionary imperatives that have guided our species for millennia. These drives manifest in modern life through complex behaviors that individuals often rationalize with sophisticated reasoning, yet the underlying motivations remain surprisingly primitive. Miller's research suggests that much of what we consider higher human behavior, art, creativity, conspicuous consumption, even moral virtue signaling, can be understood as elaborate displays designed to attract mates and signal genetic fitness. In examining the economics of attraction and sexual selection, Miller's work reveals that humans engage in constant signaling behaviors, often unconsciously. The woman who chooses expensive clothing, the man who purchases a luxury vehicle, the individual who publicly champions social causes, all may be responding to deep evolutionary drives to display resources, status, and genetic quality to potential mates. This signaling extends into professional realms, creative endeavors, and even academic pursuits. Understanding these mechanisms provides the first step toward transcendence. The individual who recognizes their own unconscious motivations gains power over them, where others remain slaves to evolutionary imperatives they do not understand. The self-aware person can choose which drives to honor and which to redirect toward higher purposes. This awareness becomes a form of strength that external forces cannot easily manipulate. Part 1. The hidden architecture of human desire. The evolutionary psychology perspective suggests that human behavior, even in its most sophisticated modern forms, remains tethered to ancient survival and reproductive strategies. Miller's research into mate selection reveals patterns that many find disturbing in their implications. Women's preferences fluctuate with their menstrual cycles, indicating that even conscious romantic choices may be influenced by hormonal states designed to optimize genetic outcomes for potential offspring. Men display resources and creativity not merely for personal satisfaction, but as unconscious advertisements of their genetic quality and ability to provide. These findings challenge comfortable notions of romantic love as purely spiritual or emotional connection. Instead, they suggest that underneath the poetry and passionate declarations lies a complex biological calculation system, honed by millions of years of evolution designed to maximize reproductive success. The individual seeking genuine connection must first acknowledge this underlying machinery before they can transcend it. In professional contexts, similar patterns emerge. Miller's work on conspicuous consumption demonstrates that much consumer behavior serves signaling functions rather than practical needs. The person who purchases an expensive watch is not merely seeking accurate timekeeping, but communicating their social status and resource availability. The individual who drives a powerful sports car is not simply seeking transportation, but broadcasting their success and genetic fitness to potential mates and social competitors. This recognition extends to intellectual and creative pursuits. Miller's research suggests that human creativity itself may have evolved as a fitness display. The artist creates not only for personal expression, but to demonstrate cognitive abilities, emotional depth, and genetic quality that make them attractive as mates. The academic pursues knowledge not only for understanding, but to signal intelligence and dedication that elevate their status in social hierarchies. Understanding these motivations does not diminish the value of art, creativity, or intellectual pursuit. Rather, it provides insight into why these activities feel so compelling and why they often become central to personal identity. The individual who grasps these mechanisms gains power to direct their creative energies more consciously, choosing whether to engage in activities for signaling purposes or for intrinsic value. The research reveals that humans consistently underestimate the degree to which their choices serve signaling functions. People believe they choose products, partners, and pursuits based on rational evaluation of features and benefits, when in reality they are often responding to deeper evolutionary imperatives. This self-deception serves important psychological functions, allowing individuals to maintain positive self-concepts while pursuing evolutionarily adaptive behaviors. Yet this same self-deception becomes a vulnerability. The person who does not understand their own motivations remains subject to manipulation by those who do. Marketers exploit signaling drives to sell products. Political movements harness virtue signaling impulses to gain adherence. Social media platforms capitalize on status display needs to capture attention and engagement. The individual who develops genuine self-awareness begins to see through these manipulations. They recognize when their emotions are being triggered by appeals to evolutionary drives, rather than rational considerations. They can distinguish between their authentic desires and the desires manufactured by external forces seeking to exploit their biological programming. This awareness creates a form of immunity to many forms of social control. The person who understands why they feel compelled to purchase certain products can resist unnecessary consumption. The individual who recognizes their status-seeking drives can choose more meaningful ways to build genuine self-worth. The person who sees through virtue signaling can focus on actions that create real positive change rather than mere social approval. Miller's research into mental health issues provides another perspective on human behavior and its evolutionary origins. His work suggests that many psychological disorders may represent extreme expressions of normal evolutionary strategies. Depression might relate to social defeat and resource scarcity. Anxiety could stem from heightened threat detection systems that once provided survival advantages. Even conditions like schizophrenia might involve alterations in cognitive systems that, in milder forms, contributed to creativity and innovation. This evolutionary perspective on mental health offers both humbling and empowering insights. It reveals that psychological suffering often has deep biological roots, reducing stigma and blame while increasing compassion for those who struggle. Simultaneously, it suggests that individuals can influence their mental states by understanding and working with their evolutionary psychology rather than against it. The person who experiences social anxiety, for example, might recognize this as an overactive status monitoring system designed to prevent social rejection and maintain group membership. Rather than simply trying to suppress anxious feelings, they might address the underlying concerns about social status and belonging that drive the anxiety. They might develop genuine skills and relationships that provide authentic social security, reducing the evolutionary triggers for anxious responses. Miller's consumer behavior research reveals how thoroughly modern life has been shaped by the intersection of evolutionary psychology and market forces. Companies invest billions in understanding and exploiting human signaling drives. They create products that allow consumers to display wealth, status, creativity, environmental consciousness, or other desirable traits. They craft marketing messages that trigger evolutionary responses, making purchases feel necessary for social and reproductive success. The individual who understands these dynamics gains significant power over their own consumption patterns. They can distinguish between purchases that serve genuine needs and those that merely satisfy signaling drives. They can choose to invest resources in experiences and relationships that provide authentic fulfillment rather than products that offer only the temporary satisfaction of status display. This conscious approach to consumption extends beyond material goods to encompass how individuals invest their time, attention, and energy. The person who recognizes their tendency to engage in activities primarily for signaling value can redirect their efforts toward pursuits that offer intrinsic satisfaction and genuine skill development. They might choose to learn a musical instrument for the joy of music rather than to impress others, or pursue physical fitness for health and capability rather than just attractive appearance. The transformation from unconscious signaling to conscious choice represents a fundamental shift in human development. Instead of being driven by evolutionary imperatives they do not understand, individuals begin to partner with their biology in service of freely chosen goals. They can honor their evolutionary heritage while transcending its limitations. This process requires ongoing self-examination and honesty about one's motivations. It demands the courage to acknowledge uncomfortable truths about human nature while maintaining compassion for oneself and others. It involves developing the wisdom to work with evolutionary drives when they serve beneficial purposes while redirecting them when they do not. The research suggests that this kind of conscious evolution is not only possible but necessary for navigating modern life successfully. The complexities of contemporary society often pit evolutionary drives against long-term well-being. The foods that taste most appealing often undermine health. The activities that provide immediate social status may not build lasting fulfillment. The relationships that satisfy short-term mating drives may not create enduring partnership. Individuals who develop the capacity for conscious choice in these areas gain tremendous advantages. They can pursue health, happiness, and meaningful relationships more effectively because they understand and can redirect the evolutionary forces that might otherwise lead them astray. They become less susceptible to manipulation and more capable of authentic self-expression. Part 2. The marketplace of human value. The commodification of human connection reveals itself most starkly in contexts where sexual and emotional intimacy become explicit economic transactions. While Miller's actual research did not involve extensive studies of prostitution, the principles of evolutionary psychology he has developed provide a framework for understanding how market forces intersect with the most fundamental human drives and vulnerabilities. In examining any context where human sexuality becomes commercialized, we observe the reduction of complex evolutionary psychology to its most basic components. The transaction strips away the elaborate courtship displays, the long-term relationship building, and the mutual investment that characterize most human mating behaviors. Instead, it creates a marketplace where evolutionary drives can be satisfied through immediate economic exchange. This marketplace reveals uncomfortable truths about human nature that many prefer not to acknowledge. It demonstrates that sexual and emotional needs, which individuals often experience as deeply personal and spiritual, can be separated from their usual social and relational contexts and satisfied through commercial means. It shows that the elaborate rituals of dating, courtship, and relationship building, while meaningful to participants, also serve as elaborate screening and negotiation processes that can be bypassed through economic arrangements. For the individuals who participate in such markets, whether as providers or consumers, the experience often reveals the gap between evolutionary drives and conscious values. The consumer may discover that sexual satisfaction obtained through commercial means feels hollow compared to connection achieved through mutual attraction and emotional intimacy. They learn that while the biological drives can be temporarily satisfied, the deeper human needs for genuine connection, validation, and belonging remain unmet. The provider faces different but equally challenging psychological terrain. They must navigate the tension between utilizing their natural capacity for sexual and emotional connection as an economic resource while maintaining their sense of personal dignity and authentic self-expression. They may develop sophisticated psychological strategies for compartmentalizing their commercial activities from their private emotional life, creating distinct personas for different contexts. Miller's research into signaling theory provides insight into how these dynamics function. In commercial sexual contexts, the usual signaling mechanisms become inverted or distorted. Instead of displays of genetic fitness, resources, and long-term commitment potential determining access to sexual partners, immediate economic payment becomes the primary signal. This creates a system where evolutionary psychology's normal feedback mechanisms are short-circuited. The psychological consequences of this short-circuiting affect both parties to the transaction. The consumer may experience a diminished capacity for normal courtship behaviors, having learned that sexual access can be obtained without the investment of time, emotional energy, and genuine attraction that usually characterizes mate selection. They may develop unrealistic expectations about sexual availability and responsiveness that affect their ability to form lasting romantic relationships. The provider may experience different but equally significant effects. Having learned to separate sexual behavior from personal desire and emotional connection, they may find it difficult to reintegrate these elements in personal relationships. The skills developed for managing commercial interactions, emotional detachment, performance of desired responses, focus on client satisfaction over personal pleasure, may interfere with the vulnerability and mutual exploration that characterize healthy, intimate relationships. These individual consequences reflect broader social implications. When sexual and emotional intimacy become commodified, it affects society's understanding of these fundamental human experiences. It contributes to a culture where sexual satisfaction is viewed as something that can be purchased rather than something that emerges from mutual attraction, emotional connection, and shared vulnerability. This commodification extends far beyond explicit commercial sexual transactions. Modern dating culture, influenced by market metaphors and economic thinking, often treats romantic relationships as transactions, where individuals exchange various forms of value: physical attractiveness, social status, financial resources, emotional support, in implicit negotiations. Dating apps reduce potential partners to marketable profiles, encouraging users to present themselves as products competing for attention and selection. The evolutionary psychology perspective reveals how these market-driven approaches to intimacy can undermine the psychological systems they are designed to satisfy. Human pair bonding evolved in contexts where partners invested significant time and resources in getting to know each other, developing trust, and building mutual commitment. The neurochemical and psychological mechanisms that create lasting attachment require this extended investment period to function properly. When intimate connections are treated as immediate transactions, these bonding mechanisms may not engage fully. Individuals may find themselves able to obtain sexual satisfaction without developing the deeper attachment that provides long-term relationship satisfaction. They may become habituated to the excitement of novelty and variety, while losing capacity for the subtler satisfactions of deepening connection with a single partner. Understanding these dynamics provides the foundation for more conscious choices about intimacy and relationships. The individual who recognizes how commodification affects their psychology can choose to invest in connection-building activities that engage their natural bonding mechanisms. They can resist cultural pressures to treat relationships as transactions and instead approach potential partners as complex human beings worthy of genuine interest and gradual discovery. This conscious approach to relationships requires developing skills that consumer culture often fails to teach: learning to experience attraction without immediately seeking satisfaction, building tolerance for uncertainty and vulnerability, developing capacity for emotional intimacy that goes beyond physical pleasure, creating relationships based on mutual growth and genuine companionship rather than just exchange of benefits. The research suggests that individuals who develop these capabilities often experience more satisfying relationships despite, or perhaps because of, the greater investment required. They learn to distinguish between the immediate gratification that commercial approaches can provide and the deeper satisfaction that comes from genuine partnership. They develop immunity to cultural messages that treat human connection as another consumer product. This transformation affects not only romantic relationships but all forms of human connection. The person who learns to value authentic interaction over transactional exchange becomes more capable of friendship, family relationships, and professional collaboration. They can engage with others based on genuine interest rather than calculation of benefits. They develop the patience for relationships that deepen gradually rather than demanding immediate satisfaction. Miller's work on virtue signaling provides another lens for understanding how market thinking affects human relationships. In a culture where everything becomes commodified, even moral and virtuous behaviors can be reduced to signaling mechanisms designed to enhance social status and attract desirable partners. Charitable giving, environmental consciousness, political activism, all can be co-opted as forms of conspicuous virtue display. The individual who recognizes these dynamics can choose to engage in virtuous behaviors for their intrinsic value rather than their signaling benefits. They can give to charity because they genuinely want to help others rather than because it makes them appear generous and compassionate. They can adopt environmentally conscious practices because they care about the planet's health rather than because it signals their moral superiority. This authentic approach to virtue requires the same kind of self-awareness and conscious choice that characterizes healthy relationships. It demands honest examination of one's motivations and the courage to act based on genuine values rather than social pressure or evolutionary drives. It involves developing internal standards of worth that do not depend on external validation or recognition. The psychological benefits of this authentic approach extend beyond the specific virtuous behaviors themselves. Individuals who act based on genuine values rather than signaling considerations often experience greater sense of integrity and self-respect. They develop confidence that comes from knowing their actions align with their deepest convictions rather than external expectations. This alignment between values and behavior creates a form of personal strength that external circumstances cannot easily disturb. A person who acts with authentic virtue has internal sources of satisfaction and meaning that do not depend on social approval or recognition. They can maintain their moral standards even when it is inconvenient or unpopular to do so. Miller's consumer behavior research reveals how market forces exploit the gap between authentic values and signaling drives. Companies market products and experiences as ways to express personal values and identity. encouraging consumers to believe that their purchases reflect their deepest commitments. Someone concerned about environmental issues is encouraged to buy environmentally friendly products rather than reduce consumption. Someone who values creativity is sold products that allow creative expression rather than developing creative skills. The individual who understands these dynamics can resist the temptation to substitute consumption for authentic value expression. They can choose to act on their values directly, rather than purchasing products that symbolically represent those values. They might reduce their environmental impact through lifestyle changes rather than just buying green products. They might develop creative skills through practice and dedication rather than purchasing creative tools and supplies. This shift from symbolic to substantive expression of values represents another form of personal liberation. Instead of being dependent on market offerings to express their identity and values, individuals develop the capacity for direct action and authentic self-expression. They become less vulnerable to manipulation by marketers who promise that products can fulfill deeper human needs. The transformation from consumer to creator, from signal sender to value actor, requires ongoing commitment and practice. It involves developing skills and capabilities rather than just purchasing access to experiences and identities. It requires patience for gradual development rather than demanding immediate satisfaction through consumption. Part 3. The Alchemy of Inner Transformation. The ultimate insight emerging from evolutionary psychology research is not that humans are slaves to their biology, but that understanding biological drives provides the foundation for transcending them. The individual who comprehends the ancient imperatives that shape thought and behavior gains the power to choose which of these drives to honor and which to redirect toward higher purposes. This conscious partnership with evolutionary psychology becomes the basis for a form of personal strength that external circumstances cannot destroy. The process begins with radical honesty about one's own motivations and behaviors. Most people maintain comfortable self-deceptions about why they make the choices they do, attributing complex evolutionary drives to rational decision-making or noble intentions. The transformative individual learns to see through these rationalizations to the underlying biological and psychological mechanisms that influence behavior. This honest self-examination often produces uncomfortable discoveries. The person who prides themselves on their intellectual achievements may recognize that much of their scholarly activity serves status-seeking and mate attraction functions. The individual who considers themselves generous and compassionate may discover that their charitable activities are partly motivated by desire for social approval and moral superiority. The person who believes they choose romantic partners based on compatibility and genuine affection may realize that evolutionary drives for genetic fitness and resource provision play significant roles in their attractions. Rather than producing cynicism or despair, this recognition becomes the foundation for authentic growth. The individual who acknowledges the evolutionary components of their behavior can begin to consciously choose which aspects to maintain and which to transform. They can honor their biological heritage while directing their energies toward freely chosen goals and values. This conscious choice-making process requires developing what might be called evolutionary intelligence, the capacity to work skillfully with inherited psychological mechanisms, rather than being unconsciously driven by them. Evolutionary intelligence involves understanding how different situations trigger different aspects of human psychology and learning to create conditions that support desired behaviors while minimizing unwanted impulses. For example, understanding that humans have strong tendencies towards social comparison and status competition, an individual might choose to spend time with people who inspire growth rather than trigger competitive jealousy. Recognizing that evolutionary psychology includes strong drives toward reciprocity and cooperation, they might structure their social and professional relationships to maximize mutual benefit rather than zero-sum competition. Evolutionary intelligence also involves understanding how modern environments often mismatch with the conditions under which human psychology evolved. Many contemporary problems, obesity, depression, social isolation, overconsumption, result from evolutionary systems responding inappropriately to modern circumstances. The individual who understands these mismatches can create personal environments that support well-being rather than trigger maladaptive responses. Someone struggling with overeating, for instance, might recognize that preferences for high-calorie foods evolved in environments where such foods were scarce and valuable. Rather than simply trying to use willpower against these preferences, they might modify their food environment to make healthy choices easier and less healthy options less available. They work with their psychology rather than against it, achieving better outcomes with less internal conflict. The development of evolutionary intelligence requires ongoing learning and experimentation. Each individual must discover how their particular psychology responds to different situations and what environmental modifications best support their goals and values. This process involves treating oneself as both scientist and subject, observing patterns in behavior and emotion while experimenting with changes in environment, relationships, and practices. This scientific approach to personal development produces more effective and sustainable changes than approaches based on willpower alone. Instead of trying to force desired behaviors through determination and self-discipline, individuals learn to create conditions where desired behaviors emerge naturally from the interaction between their psychology and their environment. The practice of evolutionary intelligence extends to understanding and working with the evolutionary psychology of others. Rather than being frustrated by seemingly irrational behaviors in family members, friends, colleagues, and romantic partners, the individual with evolutionary intelligence can recognize the biological and psychological drives underlying these behaviors. This understanding breeds compassion rather than judgment, and provides insight into how to interact more effectively. Understanding that someone's defensive behavior might stem from evolutionary systems designed to protect social status, for instance, allows for approaches that address the underlying concerns rather than just the surface symptoms. Recognizing that a partner's jealousy might reflect ancient psychological systems designed to ensure relationship commitment provides guidance for responses that build security rather than escalate conflict. This evolutionary perspective on human relationships creates possibilities for deeper connection and more effective cooperation. Instead of taking others' behaviors personally or attributing them to character flaws, individuals can recognize the universal human psychological systems that influence everyone's behavior. This recognition makes it possible to work with these systems constructively rather than fighting against them. The cultivation of evolutionary intelligence also involves understanding how cultural and social systems interact with individual psychology. Modern societies have created institutions, legal systems, markets, educational systems, democratic processes that channel evolutionary drives towards socially beneficial outcomes. The individual who understands these interactions can participate more effectively in social and political processes while avoiding being manipulated by those who exploit evolutionary psychology for personal gain. Political movements, for example, often succeed by triggering evolutionary responses related to group loyalty, threat detection, and resource competition. The person with evolutionary intelligence can recognize when their political emotions are being triggered by appeals to ancient psychological systems and can choose to engage political issues based on rational analysis and genuine values rather than just emotional reactions. This conscious engagement with politics and social issues represents another form of personal liberation. Instead of being buffeted by emotional appeals and tribal loyalties, the individual can participate in civic life based on carefully considered principles and long-term thinking about social well-being. They become less susceptible to demagogues and more capable of constructive political engagement. The development of evolutionary intelligence ultimately leads to what might be called integrated autonomy. The capacity to make choices based on conscious values while remaining connected to one's biological heritage and social relationships. This integration represents a middle path between the extremes of being unconsciously driven by evolutionary impulses and attempting to completely transcend or deny biological nature. Integrated autonomy involves accepting and honoring the evolutionary foundations of human psychology while maintaining the freedom to direct these energies toward consciously chosen purposes. It means working with biological drives when they serve beneficial functions while redirecting them when they do not. It requires maintaining connection to others while developing independence from their approval and validation. The person who achieves integrated autonomy experiences a form of strength that cannot be destroyed by external circumstances. Because their sense of worth and direction comes from internal alignment between values and behavior rather than external validation or achievement, they remain stable even when facing criticism, failure, or loss. They can adapt to changing circumstances without losing their essential sense of self. This inner stability creates the foundation for genuine service to others and contribution to society. The individual who is not driven by unconscious needs for approval, status, or security can focus their energies on activities that create real value rather than just personal advancement. They can engage in relationships based on genuine care rather than transactional exchange. They can pursue work that contributes meaningfully to human well-being rather than just personal success. Miller's research suggests that this kind of conscious evolution may represent the next stage in human development. As individuals become more aware of their evolutionary psychology and develop greater capacity for conscious choice, they become capable of transcending many of the conflicts and problems that arise from unconscious biological drives interacting with modern environments. The widespread development of evolutionary intelligence could lead to cultural and social changes that support human flourishing more effectively than current systems. Educational approaches could be designed to work with rather than against human psychology. Economic systems could channel competitive and acquisitive drives toward activities that benefit society as a whole. Political systems could be structured to encourage cooperation and long-term thinking, rather than just tribal conflict and short-term advantage. The individual who develops evolutionary intelligence and integrated autonomy becomes both a beneficiary and an agent of this transformation. They experience greater personal satisfaction and effectiveness while contributing to cultural evolution that makes similar development possible for others. They become living demonstrations that conscious partnership with evolutionary psychology can produce forms of human flourishing that transcend the limitations of unconscious biological programming. This transformation requires courage, patience, and commitment. It involves facing uncomfortable truths about human nature while maintaining compassion for oneself and others. It demands developing new skills and capabilities rather than just acquiring knowledge. It requires ongoing practice and refinement rather than one-time insight or achievement. Yet the rewards of this development extend far beyond personal benefit. The individual who achieves genuine self-mastery through understanding and conscious direction of their evolutionary psychology becomes capable of forms of love, creativity, service, and contribution that enrich not only their own life but the lives of everyone they encounter. They become sources of authentic strength in a world often characterized by unconscious reactivity and manipulation. The path from unconscious biological programming to conscious evolutionary intelligence represents perhaps the most important journey any individual can undertake. It transforms the person from someone who is acted upon by forces they do not understand to someone who acts with wisdom, compassion, and authentic power. It makes possible a life of genuine meaning and contribution rather than just survival and reproduction. In recognizing that the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, we see that true strength comes not from denying or fighting against human nature, but from understanding it so deeply that one can partner with it consciously in service of the highest human possibilities. This understanding, supported by rigorous scientific research into evolutionary psychology, provides a roadmap for individual and collective transformation that honors both our biological heritage and our capacity for transcendent choice. The individuals who walk this path become way showers for human potential, demonstrating that it is possible to live with both evolutionary wisdom and conscious purpose. They prove that understanding the science of human nature can lead not to cynicism or manipulation, but to compassion, authenticity, and genuine service to the well-being of all life. Through their example, they invite others to undertake the same journey of conscious evolution, contributing to a future where human beings can express the full spectrum of their capabilities in service of individual and collective flourishing.